Inspiration for Teachers Podcast, bringing you dynamic and inspirational educator interviews. Our fascinating guests share their professional challenges and creative resolutions for success. Discover their workable strategies, ideas, and resources to reach your educational goals. And now your host, Kelly Long.
Welcome to another episode of Inspiration for Teachers. I'm your host, Kelly Long, and I'm super thrilled to be joined alongside our inspirational educator on the show today, Angela Watson. Angela is an educational consultant, founder of Due Seasons Press and Educational Services. Angela is a National Board Certified Teacher with 11 years of classroom experience. Hi Angela, welcome to the show.
Hi Kelly, how are you?
Really good, thank you, and I'm so pleased that you've joined me on the show because you don't know this, but about a year ago I was listening to a podcast and you were the featured guest on the show. And you were talking about your passion for teaching and how much you like to help others. And I remember thinking at the time, wow, that is so powerful, because sometimes I feel that we kind of get a bit stuck and you're thinking, how do I get through this? How do I overcome the challenges that I'm facing? And yet when we share and collaborate like this podcast, it's just phenomenal because we can be helping others in our field without realizing it. And I think that's so important.
That is really exciting to hear, Kelly. Podcasting was something that was completely brand new to me. It was really so much fun to do, and I think that's kind of what inspired me to start my own podcast too.
I couldn't agree with you more, Angela. Using a podcast to facilitate collaboration of knowledge and sharing of ideas is just such a powerful tool, so I'm so with you on that. But just before we dive into your educational challenge of losing the passion for teaching and how to kind of reignite that passion, what I would like you to do is say hello to all of our listeners that are tuning in around the globe. I checked the other day and we're going out to now 61 countries, and it's totally fabulous that all those educators out there are tuning in to our show. So hello from me to you, everyone. But Angela, just take a moment just to fill in the blanks from the intro and introduce yourself to our listeners, please.
Sure. So as you mentioned, in 2009 is when I really started working with teachers as an educational consultant. I had published my first book, and it is just a book of what I was doing in the classroom, basically. It's called The Cornerstone, Classroom Management that Makes Teaching More Effective, Efficient, and Enjoyable. And what I wanted to do was just share what I was doing in the classroom as a teacher. I wanted to just take pictures of my classroom and write about my routines and those sorts of things. And I found that it really resonated with teachers just to hear someone kind of speaking to them personally. And that's what I had been doing on my blog all along, and that's what I continue to do now. I don't claim to be an expert in any one particular area. I'm just sharing what has worked for me. And then now that I do instructional coaching and consulting, and I'm in different schools all the time, I'm able to share what I see working in other classrooms and the ideas that I take and bring them into other schools and apply them there. I learn from that, what works, what doesn't, and then try to share that. So I think that's what really resonates with teachers, and I think that's what I'm most passionate about doing, is just sharing like on a mentor level from one teacher to another, because I know that when I was a teacher, I didn't have a mentor. I never did. The entire 11 years I was in the classroom, I never had anyone to mentor me. And so I was always trying to seek those people out online and just find other teachers who were willing to share their successes and their failures. And it's a lot of fun to be able to do that for other teachers now.
You have this really unique and exciting opportunity, Angela, to go into schools and cherry pick the best of what's going on and then share and spread those ideas. So that is totally awesome, having that ability to support teachers in that way. But what I've been doing on the show, Angela, with my most recent guest, is asking a question to do with teaching and learning, and to try and get to the heart of what is the most important thing teachers can do to aid learning. In your opinion, what do you think that would be?
I think probably the most powerful tool is connections with students and relationships with kids. The more that students know who you are as a person, and the more that you share yourself and your real authentic self and your personality with kids, the better your rapport is. And when you get to know them and they get to know you, it just makes it so much easier to personalize the learning for them, and it makes it so much easier for them to receive what you're doing. So I think that's probably the most important tool, and it's not something that I think is talked about in a lot of schools, but it really is the foundation for everything else. You can't just come in on day one and start, stuffing knowledge into kids' heads. We talk a lot about icebreakers and things like that at the beginning of the school year, but really it's not about the kids getting to know each other as much as it is about you getting a chance to know your students and your students getting a chance to know you and to have that rapport built. So as we come up on the start of the school year, a lot of us, our school year will be starting this fall. I think that's something to keep in mind is, on those get to know you types of activities, make sure the students get a chance to know you too, and that you're also sharing yourself in addition to inviting them to share things about them.
James Sturdivant in episode 16 of the podcast told us about how relationships with teachers and students is so important and how quite often that unique relationship is very much overlooked when it comes to training, and the training isn't always there for teachers to find out what are the best ways to get to know their students without crossing a line. In your opinion, can you share a top tip that always worked for you that might help other educators help to build those relationships with their students?
I found that whenever I told a personal story about myself and tied it into the curriculum, all the kids immediately started paying attention. So, for example, if I was modeling how to respond to a writing prompt and showing kids how to do a persuasive essay or something like that, I would use a real example from my own life rather than just making up a fictional example. And it's amazing how kids would just tune right into that. Maybe it was something like, I went to go see this movie last week and this is why I think that everyone should go see this movie, as opposed to, just picking something out of thin air. So just little ways like that. And I think that tying everything back to the curriculum is really the key to making sure that you're staying off topic, because kids will try to derail the conversation, if they realize that they can kind of get out of learning the skill, if they kind of get you off on a tangent about something. So tie it in really tightly to the curriculum. And that also keeps you from oversharing too, because a lot of teachers have that fear of revealing too much of themselves and maybe having that being used against them in some way.
Yes, because you always want to take care to protect yourself.
That's right. You're not sharing everything about your life. You're sharing, school appropriate things, and you're sharing things that are tied to the curriculum. So, find things that you're teaching and share examples that are related to that.
What we're going to do now on the show, Angela, is we're going to put you in the centre of our educational compass and find out from you in 60 seconds or less what excites you about the education profession and what you would most like to change and why.
So in terms of what excites me most right now, I'm seeing, speaking of this relationship piece, I'm seeing more and more teachers move toward building these relationships and, really tuning into what their students' needs and personalizing the learning. And I think that's really exciting because that's what gets kids excited about learning. This idea of student-centered learning, of giving kids more ownership in the classroom of what they learn and how they learn through projects, through choice, through technology. There's so many different avenues for making learning more student-centered, instead of, thinking about what is it that I want to teach and how am I going to teach it, thinking about what do I want students to learn and how can I best help each one of them learn it. I think that is a really exciting shift, and I think it not only makes learning more enjoyable for kids, but it makes teaching more enjoyable, because when the kids are excited and they're motivated and they're engaged, that makes being in front of a classroom more fun for you as a teacher. Everyone wants to teach motivated students. So I think when we tap into that piece about motivating kids, we're also tapping into the piece about motivating ourselves.
I recall watching a TED Talk that featured Dan Pink as the main speaker, and he was very much talking about the social sciences and how the way in which we motivate people has really been overlooked, and we're kind of subscribing to an old methodology when it comes to how we best motivate people. And the key word that he kept saying that kept coming up time and again was autonomy, giving people autonomy over their learning. And I think because of the pressures and the accountability measures that are placed on teachers to ensure that their students succeed, I think sometimes we're not empowered enough to help our students learn and have the autonomy over their learning process, which is essentially what we need to ensure is happening, because we want people to be empowered and engaged in their learning process. So structuring and building lessons that go back to problem solving, critical thinking, and working their way from how do I get from A to B as opposed to just going straight to B.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. And that is really the piece that I think I would want to change most about education, is trying to give teachers more autonomy as well. In so many places, teachers have been stripped of their freedom to do what's best for kids and to think creatively. and to, to take those teachable moments, to deviate from the script, deviate from the pacing guide and say, you know what, this is what my kids are really into right now. I want to just take this for a moment and just run with it and just, tap into their curiosity and really make the most of it. And I'm not seeing teachers have that freedom. I feel like that's falling away more and more. And that's something that I think is really, really critical to getting teachers to enjoy the profession and to stay in the profession, and also for them to really do a great job educating kids. Because, when we're following a script and we're not allowed to bring our own authentic selves into it and to allow kids to be themselves, it's much harder to learn and it's less enjoyable to learn. So autonomy, I think, is a really big issue with both students and teachers.
And do you think that's more of a grassroots kind of message that we're trying to get teachers to feel empowered and change that for themselves? Or do you think there's a wider issue going on where we need a more kind of structural change in how education is delivered in our countries?
I think it's both. I think there are changes that need to be made on systemic levels, and that's something that we can be advocating for in our own communities. But I think also some of the greatest change really happens at the grassroots level. And what a teacher chooses to do in his or her classroom every single day has such a big impact on those kids. And, it also, I think, can spark a little revolution within the school, too, as other teachers see and hear about what you're doing and they start trying new things in their classrooms. I think teachers can really create a lot of change just at the classroom level by kind of paving the way and showing that, these out-of-the-box ideas that people are saying, don't work because we don't have the research or the data to support them. But, going with what is best for kids and proving that works, I think is really powerful.
Because once you've demonstrated progression of learning and that it works, you can't have that taken away from you then, because you've already demonstrated that it's a viable process and it works and it's helping the learning.
Exactly. And, I think you really have to trust yourself as a teacher to say, instead of doing this worksheet on reading, I'm going to actually read a text authentically with students, and I'm going to trust that this is going to translate into a love of learning for them, a love of reading, that it's going to help them apply their reading skills in a real-world context, and that's going to translate into better test scores. I don't have to give them worksheets all day, every day. I can incorporate some of these other activities because I know that that's what's best for my students.
The key word that I'm picking up there, Angela, from you is trust. And I think sometimes we forget to trust our students, that we need to give them more responsibility. And I definitely know it's a way in which it works in Finland, that the students have more control over their time and their day, and they're given more freedom to kind of govern their own learning.
Trust is a hard one. We're scared to trust our students because so much is riding on what they do. A lot of the pressure as a teacher is like, I'm being evaluated and maybe even compensated based on how well someone else achieves. We can't control students' motivation levels in their home lives. We can't control their effort that they put forth, but yet we're held accountable for it. So it's really scary to trust students to learn. And that's why we just keep coming back to this whole thing about relationships and building rapport and really having a caring classroom community where students know we're all interdependent here and we're all counting on each other to make learning happen.
We have some really thought-provoking ideas coming up on the show, and a fantastic challenge that Angela is going to break down for us and help us to digest her experience of what it feels like to lose the passion for teaching and how to regain some of that. But just before we dive into that educational challenge, I'd like to remind our listeners that they can explore all of Angela's resources on our podcast page at Inspiration for Teachers. We'll also be tweeting out lots of additional information about the show and articles that you can read. So if you'd like to keep in the loop on all of that, please follow us at Inspiration4T, and that's the number 4 and the capital T. So Angela, on the show I like to explore a specific teaching or educational challenge that my guest has got personal experience of. So please can you take us on this journey with you and share the experience and put us in that setting of what the problem was and what you encountered, and also some ideas and solutions you've come across so that somebody else in a similar situation can take on board those ideas and implement them into their own classroom.
Sure. So I would love to talk about that burnout piece because I think that probably every teacher goes through that at some point in their career. And that was something that I experienced a couple different times. And the first time was after I'd only been in the classroom for 3 years. And, at the time I felt like this is way too soon to be feeling burned out. But if you look at the statistics, in the United States, the teacher turnover rate is incredibly high. About 30% of our teachers, I think that's the right statistic, leave within the first 5 years. So it's actually very common to feel burned out early on in your teaching career. So, if someone's listening to this and they're thinking, I feel like I should not be as tired as I am, I want you to know that's really, really normal, because teaching is very all-consuming, and it's a job that's never really done, and it's really hard to feel a sense of satisfaction because there's always something more that you could be doing. And that's what was happening to me during my third year of teaching. I was teaching pre-K, which is 4-year-olds, 3 and 4-year-olds. And that's what I thought I had really wanted to do, but I just felt like I was losing my passion for it. I was wanting to do things that, I was wanting to do things like reading groups and more independent activities that just weren't possible with preschoolers. And, I wasn't sure if the solution was to leave the field or to move to another grade level. So I started looking around at, at other jobs in the area. I was living in Washington, D.C., and, I thought about getting a job with the U.S. Department of Education. I thought that I could maybe make an impact on a greater level. So I started looking at that. And then one day I was in the dollar store and I was looking at these little erasers. And I was like, oh, those would be the perfect math manipulatives. I've got to get these. And then I realized, oh my gosh, I'm thinking about leaving the classroom. I'm not going to have a classroom to take these into. I'm not going to be able to create these games. I'm not going to be able to watch kids learn through the games that I created. And that immediately in that moment, I knew, okay, I am not done with teaching. I just need a change. I'm really passionate about this. I love what I'm doing. I'm just burnt out in this particular situation. So I moved up from pre-K to third grade, and third grade is 8 and 9-year-olds. And that completely transformed my love for education. I was in a new school. My kids were twice the age of my other kids, and I was able to try these different, project-based learning and some other things like that I had been wanting to do with kids. And that really kept me going for another 5 or 6 years. I was really passionate and excited. And then right around my 8th or 9th year of teaching, I started to feel like I was burning out again. And at that point, that was, I'd started my website at that point, and I was sharing teaching ideas there. I had just written the book that I shared at the beginning of this podcast. And I had started to do professional development in schools around the book. And I realized how much I loved teaching teachers. And, the idea of being able to coach teachers, to be able to go into their classrooms and model lessons for them and help them plan and help them evaluate how their lessons are going, that was really exciting to me. And I felt like not only would it be fun to have a different type of student to be teaching teachers instead of little kids, I also felt like I could make change on a bigger scale. And so when I started doing that in 2009, that really, that fixed the burnout for me. So even though I'm not in the classroom anymore as a classroom teacher, I'm still in education as an instructional coach. And I would say I'm probably more passionate about this field than ever. Now, this will be how many years have I been in education now? I've been since 1999. And I feel like I'm more passionate now than ever because I am really thinking about my own needs as an educator and trying to meet those needs. So that would be my advice to anyone who is kind of facing burnout, is to think about what could you do differently in our field. Could you switch schools? Because, we all know that one school to another can be a huge change in culture and expectations, your coworkers, all of that can make a big difference. You might stay in the same grade level, but being in a different school could really transform your passion. So it could be a school change. It could be a grade level change. It could be a district change, and teaching for a different school system. Or it could be moving out of the classroom and doing coaching or being a support staff. I know people who have moved into positions where they're teaching small groups or they're doing guidance counseling. They're doing, literacy specialist work or math specialist work. All of these are really great ways to stay in the field and to keep making a difference for kids and doing what you love, but just in a different capacity. And you don't have to leave the classroom permanently. That's the other thing, is you can take a step in one of these directions and then move back and forth between the classroom. So I think that just kind of keeping an open mind about what does it mean to be an educator can really help with burnout, because there's just so many different capacities that you can work in with kids.
The key thing that just struck me about that story that you've just shared with us, Angela, is the word excite. I think quite often we forget that learning needs to be exciting, and we can make it and facilitate it in that way. And I can understand why people do lose the passion for teaching in that way, because it takes so long to develop and build up that bank of resources. So once you've got to that point, you do want to use those resources that you've built, but it is quite easy to fall into that trap of you've used it once, you use it again, use it a third time. And then it gets boring because you're on that treadmill of just repeating the same lessons. So changing it up and looking at new ways, whether that's implementing technology to make it exciting, or coming up with I know it sounds silly, but an old way of using a classroom and your students to learn to make it exciting. I mean, even silly things like using balloons and balls, and I mean, kids love that stuff. I use music in my classroom all the time, and we play musical chairs, and well, it's actually musical corners, and the kids go to different areas of the room, and they can't play the game until they answer a question, and there's lots of kind of excitement built into it, because it's like, who's the question going to fall on, who gets to pick the next number, and then they all get to dance around, and I've got to say their dancing is hilarious. I have never seen anything like it, but building that excitement back into your lesson can really help with that process of reigniting the passion for teaching.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, because, there are times when I think you can also kind of burn out at different points during the school year. So maybe you start off really passionate and then you hit a lull, and then, you can end on a strong note again. And that whole idea that you just shared, and you said that so well about, tapping into what makes teaching exciting for you, that's something that you can do even without changing what position you're in your school. Because, I can think of many, many times in my teaching career where I'm like, this is a great class, and I love my school, I love my grade level, but I'm just feeling like, I don't know, I'm just kind of like, I'm just not feeling the passion right now. And I realized it was exactly what you said. I was teaching the same thing the same way. I was using the exact same lesson I had used the year before, and the year before that, and the year before that. And so taking the time to get online and look for new teaching ideas, or to talk with other teachers and say, how are you teaching this? I'm just kind of bored with the way I've been doing this. How are you teaching this skill? That can really, having a new idea to take into the classroom the next day is sometimes all you need to get that passion back, to have something that you can really look forward to and that you're excited to do with your students.
I'm really going to put you on the spot now, Angela. So what does it feel like to be in that situation where you're losing your passion for teaching and recognizing those burnout signs? What would you say would be the key things to look out for? And also, what remedies or solutions do you have for addressing those?
The main sign that you're approaching burnout is when you start to feel like you're neglecting all the other aspects of your life. And, this little root of bitterness starts to like pop into your life, where you're feeling like you're working too much, but you feel like you don't have a choice and you have to, and you feel resentful about it. And I think that having that root of resentment and bitterness kind of poisons your attitude towards teaching. So if you're working more than you want to work, and you're bringing all this stuff home, and you're spending your evenings grading papers instead of spending it with your family, and you allow yourself to get bitter about that, then when you go into the classroom the next day, instead of being excited to share with your students what you did the night before and the great lessons that you've planned, and give them feedback on the assignments that you graded, you're kind of resentful towards them because you feel like they're encroaching on your time. And I think you've got to nip that in the bud, because as teachers, we have to approach this job as, we are there to serve, and we're there to serve the kids, and we're there to serve the community. And if you're going to serve someone, you have to do it with a glad heart, right? Like, you can't serve someone out of resentment. You have to serve them because that's what you really want to do. And that's where you get your joy from, is from serving other people. So I think to tap back into this idea that I'm doing this because this is a calling on my life, and this is something that I feel passionate about and I know is making a difference in other people's lives, and I'm doing it for that reason, can really help. And then I think also the flip side of that is making sure that you're not giving all of yourself to your work. Because if the only part of your life that you have to share with students is your work life, then that doesn't make you very interesting or very relatable, or, you have to be a passionate person, not just a passionate teacher. So you have to do things in your life that you are passionate about. You've got to have time for your hobbies. You've got to have time for the people who are important to you too. So I think taking a step back and thinking about, okay, big picture here, what is the most important thing that I need to do for tomorrow? Do I really need to spend an extra half an hour, looking for clip art to put onto this activity that I'm giving to kids? Or would that half an hour better be spent, connecting with my own children or with my partner or going for a walk or getting some exercise? Really being intentional, I think, with your time and making sure that you are cultivating a life for yourself apart from your work.
What we're going to do now, Angela, is we're going to move on to our inspiration round, and it's our quick fire round to find out from you your best educational resources. So I like to put you in the spotlight, Angela, and I like to find out from you what has been your proudest educational moments.
I think my proudest moment was after I had been out. This was back when I was teaching pre-K, and I had to be out for several weeks because I was ill, and I was really, really nervous about how my kids were doing when I wasn't there. And, when I came back that first day, I was so nervous. I had no idea if the classroom was going to be completely, torn apart and disorganized and the kids are going to be running wild. And, I walked in that day and my students came over and they greeted me and they gave me hugs, and then they walked over to the rug and they got a book from the bookshelf and they sat down and started reading, which was exactly what I had taught them to do for their morning work routine. And my principal came in at that moment, and that's when she gave me, I think, probably the best compliment I've ever gotten as an educator. And that was, she said, "Angela, this is what they did every single day while you were gone. You've got those routines so well ingrained in them that it didn't even occur to them to do anything differently." And that was the moment when I realized that I had taught my students to take ownership of their own learning, and they didn't need me in order to learn. And that was a really foundational moment for me, and it really impacted the rest of my time in the classroom, because I was always kind of thinking in the back of my mind, how can I empower the kids to run this classroom themselves? How can I take myself out of the equation and give them the ability to take charge of their own learning?
I think your high expectations set the benchmark. They knew day after day going into that classroom what to expect. So let's move on to the best advice you've ever received.
The best advice that I've ever received is something actually that I've just heard recently, and so maybe that's why it's sticking in my mind. And it is, don't sacrifice what you want most for what you want right now. And I think that can apply to so many different aspects of our lives. Sometimes it requires discipline to say, you know what, I'm not going to be happy with myself if I just, lay on the couch for the next 3 hours instead of getting things done tonight that I needed to get done. So I can't sacrifice what I want most, which is, a smooth running classroom and engaged kids. I can't sacrifice that for what I want right now, which is to not get my work done. I want to just kind of be lazy in the moment. So it kind of strikes me on that level, but it also kind of strikes me from a bigger level of like, what do you want most out of life? And are you making choices every day to move yourself towards those goals and to put those priorities into place?
It is easy to drift and lose that focus, but I really do like the idea of sitting on the sofa right now because I've had a hard week teaching and I could really do with the rest right now.
And, I think that's fine too. I think there's, we have this idea that we're supposed to be productive all the time and busy all the time, but our bodies need rest, and not just sleep, but just downtime. Like, I think there's nothing wrong with wasting time if you're intending to waste time. If you're saying this is a block of time where I'm not going to do anything and I'm just going to allow my mind to wander and I'm just going to rest and not force myself to be productive, I think that's great. I think the guilt only sets in when you're supposed to be doing something else. So maybe just scheduling in that time and saying, you know what, from 5 to 6, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to relax and I'm not going to feel guilty about it. I think that's important to do.
Let's now move on to your sources of inspiration.
So the things that inspire me, as I mentioned before, when times in my teaching career when I, was kind of feeling a little burnt out or maybe not that excited about teaching, going online and connecting with other passionate teachers was really important to me, and it continues to be important to me now. Every single day I'm in Facebook groups for teachers. I'm on Pinterest. I'm, following teacher hashtags on Instagram and on Twitter, and, finding other people who are passionate about what they're doing really can spark passion in you. And I think that's especially important if you're in a school where there's not a lot of other passionate educators or not a lot of people who are being innovative and thinking outside the box. So, finding those people and those ideas online is really important. My PLN, my personal learning network, is what really is inspiring me right now. And it's an ever-growing thing. It changes, as different social media options come up. But I think that finding those people online is really important.
And can you share with our listeners a personal teaching habit that works for you time and again?
One of the things that I really like to do as a teacher is to create not just routines in the classroom, but also rituals. And by ritual, I mean something that has meaning to it and something that kind of makes the ordinary feel special. And that's something that I like to do for myself personally and also teach to kids. So I like to have my morning rituals, in the classroom. I like to have different lamps around the classroom to have different lighting, not just the overhead lighting. So I'll go around and, turn those on one by one and really be contemplative about the learning that's going to happen in that area of the day. So I'm turning on the lamp in the classroom library and I'm thinking about the kids reading and I'm envisioning them, really becoming passionate learners and passionate readers. And then I'm walking over to the computer area and turning on the lamp over there and I'm picturing the learning that's going to happen there and the ways kids are going to use technology to explore the topics. And so just being really intentional about thinking about the different areas of my classroom and how they're going to be used throughout the day. And, just little things like that. So, and then also having the same thing for kids when we're lining up. There might be a certain song that we sing. There might be a certain game that we play, something that just kind of makes that aspect of the day, which could otherwise be mundane, feel a little bit more special. And it's something to look forward to and something to make the classroom feel more like a home. It's some place that you spend so many hours of the day in. So there should be enjoyable things that take place in the classroom. And I think that you as a teacher can create those.
I have a colleague that I work across the corridor from, and she loves singing, and she's a terrible, terrible singer. But she has built that into her routine. So the kids turn up to her lesson, they all burst out into song, and I can hear them across the corridor, and I'm thinking, that's amazing, but you're still a terrible singer. But it goes back to that whole thing about building relationships and what can you do with your children in order to foster that environment of trust and a good relationship. And now, Angela, we're going to move on to your best educational resource.
I think probably the resource that I'm most passionate about right now is podcasts. This is something that, I've been getting into more and more over the last 2 years. In these last 6 months, I just feel like podcasts have done so much for my own professional development. And now there is a Twitter hashtag called PodcastPD. And they do a weekly chat there, and it's a great place you can follow that hashtag to not only participate in the chats, but also just to find great podcasts for educators. And, as I've mentioned, I've started my own podcast now. It's called Truth for Teachers, which is a weekly 10-minute podcast designed to inspire teachers. And I hope that teachers will find resources like that and use them to get inspiration at times that otherwise they may not be having any. So on a drive to the car, when you might otherwise just be kind of sitting there and worrying or thinking about something that, isn't productive, you can fill your mind with positive thoughts and with inspiring and motivating educators. So I love to listen to podcasts in the car and when I'm exercising, when I'm cooking, when I'm cleaning. I pretty much have a podcast on at all times.
Angela, it has been totally awesome you joining me on the show today, but we're nearly at the end, and I just want to say thank you from me. I have learned so much. But before we say goodbye, how can our listeners connect with you?
So the best place to reach me is on my website, which is thecornerstoneforteachers.com. And from there you can find all the different social media options and ways to connect.
Thank you for joining us today on Inspiration for Teachers. For more resources, tips, and advice, visit our website, inspirationforteachers.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, we would love to connect with you. Just click like on our Facebook page at facebook.com/inspirationforteachers.